Hey, 944 guys. Heard nightmare stories again the other day about some younger person trying to get the flywheel sensors out of the bracket in the back of these 8-valve 944s. It can be a real bear. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the systems and then some of the solutions. So let's start with these guys. This is a flywheel sensor, crank sensor with the wire cut off. There's two of these back here in the back, right? This is a first generation bracket for the back of the early blocks. So these slide right down in and bolt in. The front one is a BG marked on your engine wiring harness, is the reference sensor. The rear one is marked DG with a little yellow collar on your engine wiring harness, and that's your speed sensor. So reference sensor in front, speed sensor in back, always in relation to the forward end of the car. And I memorized that by BG, DG. Sounds like big dog to me. So in my twisted mind, that's what I used to memorize these things when I was newer at it. So big dog always leads the pack. BG goes in front, all right? Front reference sensor, back speed sensor. It's an identical part. It does the same job, a different function obviously, but I mean as far as a magnetic pulse signal being sent to your DME, read as a sine wave converted to a square wave so that the digital electronics in your DME can work with it, okay? So that's a crank sensor or a flywheel sensor, you can call it that. Car does not have two reference sensors. One's a reference, one's a speed. This is an early generation bracket, so it only has the two holes right here. There's a sleeve on there that goes into the block, boom, and then you set your height for this thing, these sensors, away from your flywheel and your starter ring by way of that Allen head, okay? There's two 8mm socket head, Allen head bolts that go in. One's your pivot and one is your adjustment. It's got a big window there for, like I said, making this thing go up and down. There's a set limit for that where it needs to be so close so that it gets the signal and transmits that electronic pulse to the DME. You can't get it too close, you can't get it too far, right? Get it too close, you're gonna strike. Always turn the engine over by hand with a 24mm crank bolt, socket in the front, and listen for that thing. Go through a couple revolutions and make sure you're not striking. It's almost always the case if you are, you're striking on the starter ring. So let's talk about positioning and adjustment. When you're down in here, you've got your reference sensor in, you've got your speed sensor in. You're going to go for your speed sensor in the back to set the height of that bracket. So tack that thing in, doesn't have to torque it, just make sure it's all the way down and set your adjustment like this. So you want to be just barely not contacting your starter ring. I believe it's 0.8mm plus or minus a little tiny bit. So get that thing set. You can do that in one of two ways. Porsche says to glue a small washer on the tip of that and just drop it down in place, boom, till it contacts, tighten your hardware down, pull that out, remove the washer, and use your sensor. I have multiple old sensors for teaching, for messing around. Here's another pretty slick tool that Mr. Gunderson came up with. It's a 3D printed replica of a sensor. In addition, it's got the depth of it, original, plus the right amount of distance to get your depth set correctly on your starter ring, okay? So starter ring measures the pulses sent right here, boom, like that's what triggers those. Every time that comes past a tooth, it sends a signal to the DME saying how fast you're going. The one in front is your reference sensor. That's going to go up here, and it gets that trigger pulse one time around for your top dead center number one. It tells the DME that's where it's at. Super important for starting. You don't even need the thing after you run. After you start the car, you can actually pull it out and it'll keep running. And so it uses that for starting. So that's the piece, that's the equipment terminology. Here's a thing for setting the depth. Let's talk about the different types of brackets depending on what you're gonna have to be dealing with. The early cars have just this simple piece, two holes, two mounts, okay? Later cars like 85.5 or so have this third, what I call a dealership tester. And it involves this, you can see it's in line kind of with the reference sensor. It involves the second trigger on here. It's for doing some diagnostics, I think, at the dealership. I wasn't around at the time, haven't learned about it, but I know it's there for that. The third type is an evolution of this second one, and it has the dealership tester snapped off, probably because it was in a racing application. But if you look at it, it's got this extra sleeve That was an update that Porsche did to try to eliminate noise interference from your reference sensor. So sometimes when you're cranking the car, that starter's throwing out noise, if you will, and it sends a signal down the reference sensor line to the DME, and it fires the engine at the wrong time. So you'll be trying to crank the car, all of a sudden, bang, 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 makes a bunch of noise and stops. Try it again, it works perfectly. So that was in an effort to try to keep the starter from interfering with the reference sensor signal. Here, typical 8 heads that go in. Let's talk about getting these stuck sensors out. You can try all kinds of ways. I usually put some penetrant in there, affectionately known around my shop as weasel piss, in there. Let it soak down the hole, just to get this thing moving in there. And I spin it back and forth and try to pry up. You can get underneath it. Don't snap it in half, because then you got less to work with. But a slick trick that I figured out was, if you can get it to move up some but not out, we'll play with the reference sensor here. Bang, boom, that's in. So what we do is get it up as far as you can. Yeah, it's probably going to go as far as that ring, that O-ring goes right there. It keeps crap out of there. It'll probably go as far as that O-ring goes, right? If you can spin that thing, spin it over to the side for a minute, yeah? And then take a 6mm socket head, Allen head. We'll put that in, right? Get it underneath. And I'm going to flip it this way so you can see the depth relative. Get that thing underneath. Spin the reference sensor, not quite enough. Spin the reference sensor back over it to center it on the hole like that. Take your Allen head, however you're going to use, machine like that, and it'll go through here with this Allen wrench, right? So just start cranking it, and it's going to lift that sensor right out. Let's get that. See if we can make this work pretty. See that, guy? And what it's going to do is apply a force pretty evenly, on a strength member part of that thing, and hopefully that'll get it to back right out for you. So boom, it goes over. Pull your little tool out. I've got a variety of lengths of 6mm socket heads right there to get that done. Sometimes that's a bitch getting the bracket out, which if you get the sensors out, you may get the bell housing off if you're doing a clutch operation. You got a sleeve like this, not going to happen. So you may have to remove the bracket. Some special tools that I use for getting the bracket out are this guy here, 6mm Allen on a quarter drive. You can get this guy in here like this, boom, and still have room, because it's a broke back wrench, still have room to get away from the firewall so you can crank that thing, okay? Whenever you're working in that area too, put a rag over your sight holes on your clutch bell housing, okay? Here's another little slick wrench I got from my Matco Hero tool guy. And it just pushes through to change the direction, loosening, tightening. That'll fit right in here in this tight area too if you need that. You can always resort to an Allen wrench, a regular 90-degree Allen wrench, right? So not a problem there. We'll figure out a way to get that thing out. This sleeve, by the way, if you ever have to move that to do whatever, you can just put a piece of wood on there and tap on that thing and drive that sleeve up to maybe make it easier for getting the bracket back into the car with the sleeve in place. And then same operation, tap it back down. Don't hit it so hard that you distort the lip. Don't focus your blows on that thing. Spread the load out so it's just aluminum, right? So put that thing back in after you've got the bracket in place. That's a little helpful tip for working with that guy. So the getting the sensors out is sometimes a bear. It's the first thing I do on a clutch job. It's the very first thing. I go up and I check the flywheel sensors. If we need it, put some penetrant in there, and then go back to the rest of the operation for getting the clutch out. So because these can be a real sticking point. The one we did yesterday took about 45 minutes to get the flywheel sensors out with all my stuff. So feel bad for the garage mechanic in the middle of Iowa that doesn't have any other resources. But you get through it. You just figure out stuff, see how systems work, and use your noggin to improvise tools and techniques and stuff. So I hope that helps out a little bit, helps help you understand the systems and how they work together, and then some shortcuts and tips on installation and installation. Okay, have fun with the 944, and we'll see you next time.